our driveway's done and we finally got a break in the rain. It's been raining for about a month and a half. So we're going to get our driveway gate up. So what we're doing is drilling some holes, pouring some concrete, and putting the poles for our gate in the ground today.
If you have a bunch of holes to drill in the ground and you want to save your back, make sure you get one of these cheap things from Harbor Freight. It really takes a lot of stress off yourself. Basically where your pinky is.
I don't know where the fuck goes in there. Because we have a lot of concrete projects coming up, we decided to invest in this mud mixer. So because of our location, we're a little more remote. That makes concrete delivery a lot more expensive and it takes quite a while to get concrete here. So we decided to grab this because it's half the work of a standard barrel concrete mixer. So we're going to try this out for the first time today on our posts for our driveway gate before we get into a bigger project, which is the foundation for our cabin.
That's why it was bunching up. I think it was just way too dry. Next hole should turn out better with the... We should have a mixer in a better setting. It's not all over. So that first one, we didn't have enough water coming out. We had the flow valve for the water turned down too much, and the mix was coming out a little dry. So we turned it up, but by the time we got it turned up, it already went through all the concrete that we put in it. It goes really fast. So we're gonna try it again with a little bit more water flow and see what happens. That one almost looks a little too soupy.
Yeah.
Of course, that busted bag wasn't quite enough for the whole thing. It's gonna be so close, but I'm gonna have to open another bag. Because I don't want to put too much in there, because then we gotta dump it out anyways. Might be enough. A lot of water because it's top. I think it works better when you keep it consistent. You keep it cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By the time I put it in, it'll already be a bunch of water again. It's hard for these small jobs. I can see how it'd be really good for a big job, like Sonic too. That's such an easy cleanup. Now there's not enough water in here.
What do you think about that mud mixer?
It's gonna make things a lot faster than a regular mixer, that's for sure.
A little hard to use on a small job.
Yeah.
We're going to give these some time to cure, and once it's cured, we are going to put our gate on.
It's heavy carrying that far.
The concrete's cured, so it's time to weld our hinges on and get our gate up.
The next one. One, two, three, four. Yeah. Basically, you do it till there's 4 left. That's nice and snug.
Really hangs down here.
Is it dragging?
Yeah, without a wheel or something. Bring it to me. I want to see what you found.
I'm going to weld this bolt right on here so that nobody can pick the gate up off the hinges, because that would easily defeat a security gate. Like that.
We have a locking gate.
Just gotta get a caster wheel on it and some paint. Goddamn gardeners. I'll never buy this again.
So the driveway gate is done and we are happy with how it turned out. It will be nice to have a little bit of added security to the property, and we think it's a really great addition to the driveway. We're gonna head on over to the garden and pick some stuff for dinner. So we made a pit stop in the greenhouse. I wanted to show you a little bit of how things have been going in here. This bed of tomatoes is doing extremely well. We were a little apprehensive at first about how they were going to turn out, because when we were hardening them off, we actually broke a couple in that process and they were starting to get pretty leggy from being inside for so long. Unfortunately, winter just lasted forever this year. We still had snow on the ground in early June, and we anticipated being able to get these outside at the end of May or early June. So they were quite late going out, so that it resulted in them being a little leggy. But The Homestead and beefsteak variety of tomatoes has been doing really, really well. They have a lot of blooms on them, and we anticipate having tomatoes here very shortly. Unfortunately, the San Marzano tomatoes are not doing so well. This is, I guess, just one of those varieties that just don't do well up here in Alaska with the cold weather. So next year we won't be planting those, and we'll be getting more cold hardy tomato varieties, as well as planting more beefsteak and Homestead tomatoes because they're doing so well. But as you can see, the San Marzanos are just not doing well. We have about 8, and they all look about the same. They're leggy, they're a little yellow. They might be lacking in some nutrients. It could be the lack of sunlight. We had over 2.5 months of nothing but rain, where we had maybe 1 to 2 days of sun, and that really affected the tomatoes and peppers and the rest of the garden. So next year, we're not going to plant this variety. We'll just stick with what's actually doing well this year. Something that we're actually really happy about too is how well some of these buckets of tomatoes were doing. So when we were hardening them off, we had a lot of tomatoes that were so leggy that they busted off at the top, kind of like this one, and we weren't really thinking that they were going to make it. So we didn't actually put those in the raised beds because we thought they were just, you know, a lost cause. But when they started actually growing more blooms and leaves, we figured, let's go ahead and get some buckets and see what they do. So we found some food grade buckets, and we planted some of our herbs in there, but then we planted the tomatoes that were just a stem a couple of months ago in there, and they are just absolutely flourishing in these buckets, and a couple of them have blooms on them, so we're pretty sure that they're going to start producing tomatoes here soon. Unfortunately, the peppers are not doing as good as the tomatoes this year. With the extended winter and the lack of sunlight and warmth because of the extreme rainy season that we've been having and cooler temperatures, they are just really lacking this year. So we know that in the future we'll have to add a lot of nutrients to the soil and some additional fertilizers than what we've already been adding, but we really think that the weather and the temperature have had a lot to do with how poorly the peppers have been doing. We are getting some peppers on the plants, but they're just not tall. I planted them about 6 inches deep already, and they're only about 6 inches tall now, so they're just not getting tall, they're not getting bushy. They are producing some peppers, but we'll see how production really is. It doesn't really seem like they're going to produce a lot of peppers. So that'll be something to do differently next year, is add more fertilizer, and hopefully the weather cooperates with us a little better next year. We can get them in the ground sooner, so that way they're not sitting inside for so long. So this garden is having a little bit of the same issues that the greenhouse is having, with the fact that everything was just so late in being put into the ground, especially the seeds that needed to go right in the ground, like the carrots and the turnips. And with us not being able to plant until almost mid-June, it really pushed back the growing season. We already have a really short growing season. It's about 108 days or even less this year because of the snow. We've had more sun now in about the last week and a half than we had all summer, so things are finally starting to pick up and flourish. So our lettuce, I planted 2 different successions of lettuce. We have the first half that was planted back in June, and then I just planted some about a week ago for a little bit later in the season. So we're going to go ahead and harvest some lettuce for dinner tonight. I'm not going to harvest the whole head of lettuce, I'm just harvesting some leaves for our salad for dinner tonight. So we have a great variety of lettuce that we're growing this year. We're growing some butter crunch. We have red romaine lettuce. We have red oak leaf lettuce. And we have some black seeded Simpson in here. And I even have some iceberg lettuce in our next succession of lettuce. I think this is pretty good for dinner. I'm going to grab some kale and add that in as well. Not all of the kale is ready, so I'm going to pull just what is. This year we grew red Russian and dwarf Siberian. This is some of our dwarf Siberian, so we're going to grab a little bit of that too. Typically I would harvest the whole thing, but this time I'm just harvesting a couple of leaves because I don't want to pull it all out of the ground right now. So unfortunately, as I mentioned, it has just been a really cold summer this year. So it probably took until about the last week, week and a half for us to have temperatures that hit 70 degrees. And prior to that, most days were only in the 50s and in the 40s most nights, especially the days that it's been raining, which has been pretty much every day in the last 2.5 months. So because of that, some of the vegetables thought it was fall and it was time to bolt because there just wasn't the sunlight. It was being overwatered. And so unfortunately some of the cabbage has bolted, some of the broccoli has bolted, and some of the Swiss chard has bolted. But that's okay, it's something to learn for next year. We do plan on having our own compost this year. Again, it was just such a quick crunch time for getting the plants in the ground. Once they were already inside, they were getting too big for the RV, and we had to get them in the ground. As soon as the snow melted, we got our garden together and we got our mounds in, and it just really wasn't enough time to have the mounds out here for very long to get the dirt heated up, and it just caused a delay in getting everything out here and planted. And then on top of that, it's rained, it's been chilly, and so things are just not growing as they typically would. For next year, we're going to add a lot more to this garden in terms of soil. So we have a compost started with some topsoil, and we're going to throw our food scraps in there, our chicken manure in there, and if we get some fish, we're going to throw some of that in there, as well as getting some additives from our local nursery here to add to the soil and make it super rich and really good soil for growing. We already have really good soil where we live, and we just need to add a little bit more nutrients to it for next year. So that's something that we know for now, but again, this year it was just crunch time to get everything in the ground, so we really didn't have time to work on that, nor do we really want to go buy truckload after truckload of topsoil just because our garden is so big. We wanted to utilize the resources that we already had. Again, this is like a learning experience for us. This is our first summer up here in Alaska, and we weren't sure what exactly was going to grow well, what won't grow well. We're technically cold zone 5A to 5B, but we were trying to treat it a little more along the lines of like zone 4 or zone 3 with planting, just because it does stay chillier here at night, and we don't have the warmer temperatures on the peninsula like they do up in the interior. So we wanted to kind of treat this like cold weather planting because it is still Alaska. That being said, there's a lot of varieties of plants that we already had seeds for that I won't be planting next year just because it just didn't do well in this environment, and I'll be taking some advice from some locals about some different varieties of these vegetables that do really well in our area. Some of the things that we planted in the garden this year were a variety of kale, cabbages, peas, beans, broccoli, cauliflower, Swiss chard, Brussels sprouts, potatoes, a couple different varieties of carrots, turnips, radishes, celery. Now, some of that stuff's not doing well at all, and other stuff is really flourishing, like the lettuce behind me. And the carrots are doing really well. We should have some carrots by the end of the season, as well as the potatoes. We have a couple of small heads of broccoli coming in. Our kale is doing great. It should be ready for harvesting here very shortly. I pulled a couple of leaves off tonight. Our cabbage is just now starting to form heads on it. Again, it's been really cold and there's been a lack of sunlight, so everything just kind of thought it was fall and just stopped growing. So again, next year we'll add a lot of nutrients to the soil. We'll have our own compost, and we'll try and get things planted a lot sooner depending on the weather. And something for next year that we decided that we're going to do is add miniature high tunnels on each of the rows to help heat up the area to give them a longer growing season instead of just planting them right out in the open. All right, we are going to take all of this lettuce and kale, and I'm going to go start dinner. While the chicken is sauteing, I'm going to go ahead and start on a dressing. So I'm making a Dijon vinaigrette dressing. I found this recipe sometime last year and I've kind of adapted it kind of to my own. So we're going to go ahead and get that started. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a couple of garlic cloves. Now we like garlic, so I'm going to cut up about 4 to 5 cloves to put in here. Alright, once the garlic is all chopped up, we're going to add that right into our salad dressing container. Next, I'm going to add about a 1/4 cup of Dijon mustard. Now, I didn't have Dijon, I have deli mustard, spicy deli mustard. You can use brown spicy mustard, homemade spicy mustard, whatever you want to use. I like to add a little bit of salt and pepper at this point. Go ahead, just add a little bit of salt and some pepper. And I'm going to start with about a 1/2 cup of olive oil. And then we'll go from there. Now I'm going to add about a 1/4 cup of vinegar, maybe a little bit more. I have apple cider vinegar. You can use white distilled vinegar or white wine vinegar, whatever is your favorite. I want a little bit more than a 1/4 cup. I'm at about a 1/3 of a cup. And then I like a little bit of creaminess with our dressing, so I'm going to add about 3 to 4 tablespoons of mayonnaise. And I'm going to put the lid on and give this a good shake. This is what the dressing looks like when it's all mixed up. So I already washed the greens, so I'm going to go ahead and prep those. I'm going to pull the stems off the kale. And then I have our mixture of lettuce, I'm going to go ahead and break this all up, make it into bite-sized pieces. So unfortunately I don't have any of our own carrots or tomatoes for this salad, but I do have some carrots and a locally grown tomato from a nursery that's nearby. And I have some scallions that I'm going to add in there. I didn't want to put a regular onion in there, but I just wanted that mild onion flavor, so we're going to do scallions. So the last thing that I'm adding into our salad is some fireweed blooms. Now I read that you should grab the blooms when they are fresh and tender, and ours bloomed like 2 or 3 days ago in the greenhouse. Some shoots just came up in between some of the gardens, so I let that bloom, and I'm going to add some of that to the salad. It is a gorgeous evening out here. Finally, there's no mosquitoes.
Yeah, I'm glad they're gone. They've
It's
been
like,
gone for a little while now, though.
yeah, it's like 65 degrees in the sun. Maybe not in the shade.
Yeah, it's been staying right around 65 most of the day.
And we get to eat fresh lettuce from the garden and locally grown tomato.
We're eating flowers. I like the dressing.
Dressing is good. It's one of my favorites. Really tangy this time.
Can you even taste the flowers?
I don't think I've tasted a flower yet. The lettuce has a very, it's a mild flavor, but it's really good flavor. There's a fireweed bloom.
Just tastes like a plant.
It doesn't taste like anything in particular. It's very mild. I did read if you pick them too late that they get really bitter, so that's why I picked the ones that just bloomed. It's a very mild flavor. We're going to finish up our salads and enjoy this beautiful evening that we're having. So thank you for watching, and we will see you again soon. Bye, little chickens. Look, I got some snacks for you.